The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the guests appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of 8 News Now or Nexstar Media Group.
We actually believe it from our internal polling that this is a dead heat race. It's going to be a sprint through the finish line.
Tonight on Politics Now, hustling towards the primary election. Republican Senate candidate Sam Brown says he's gaining ground on frontrunner Adam Laxalt.
We should reinstate the assault weapons ban.
President Joe Biden calls on Congress to pass gun control legislation. We dig into how bipartisan talks in Congress are going. And safeguarding our schools. New technology CCSD is trying to protect students and staff.
From 8 News Now, this is Politics Now.
Thank you very much for joining us here on Politics Now. I'm John Langler, and we start with the upcoming primary election. 1 week of early voting is now in the books. So far, nearly 24,000 people in Clark County have voted. The most popular locations at the Galleria Mall and Centennial Center. Nevada's a closed primary state, so we can't read too much into the number from each party that have voted already. But early voting does last until June 10th, and you can vote at any of the early voting locations. All the details are at 8newsnow.com. Nevada's Senate race, it's the most watched one in the country. The Republican primary, it is getting closer as we approach primary day. Wounded veteran Sam Brown says his polling has it as a dead heat. I spoke with him about the race, the country, issues in the country, and his opponent, Adam Laxalt. Let's start with an issue that certainly the entire country is watching now in light of what took place in Texas last week, this horrible shooting at this elementary school. It gets to the idea of gun rights. Legislation is being discussed, some of it anyway, on Capitol Hill. If you're elected senator, what kind of legislation would you support to potentially alter gun legislation, gun rights in the U.S.?
Yeah, so I think the root issue here is that we have a mental health crisis in our country. And, you know, in the case that of this Texas shooting, it's obviously a tragedy. Families are burying their loved ones as we speak, and an open investigation. So, you know, I think there's a lot to be learned about this case, but we need to look not at how do we erode the Second Amendment and people's ability to lawfully own guns, but how do we help parents in many cases identify when their child is struggling with mental illness. And we do need to do a better job of making sure that those resources are available to everyone. And that's something that has been in decline here in the United States is access to mental health resources.
Is the focus gun ownership, or is the focus on the kinds of guns we're talking about here? Assault weapons versus something that is used for sporting or something along those lines?
Yeah. The sad reality is that if someone is at a place where they intend to do mass harm to other human beings, they're going to find a tool or a weapon to do that. And so I think that to isolate it on one type of weapon is the wrong approach, and we'll continue to be you know, saddened by tragedies with other, you know, weapons being used.
As senator, would you do, or would you change anything about what is in law in Nevada with regards to abortion and broadly about funding for Planned Parenthood?
So you know, I'm pro-life, but it's not necessarily constitutionally protected here in the state. It's NRS. But like, as a senator, on a federal level, I have no control over what the state does. But look, if the people of Nevada want to bring that issue back up and put it back on the ballot, that's something that the people will have to do. But I am not in support of any federal funding for abortion whatsoever.
So you would, if you were elected to the Senate, you would vote against it, you would find ways to...
Yeah, in fact, I think, look, to be pro-life shouldn't just be to protect life in the womb. It should be to protect life even after birth when there are challenging circumstances. And so, I think that we need to look at how do we help, fund and lower the cost of adoption. How do we ensure that when a woman feels like her choice is either to not be able to afford to provide for a child or to terminate that life, that we ensure that funding to, for diapers or formula or, just the basic necessities of raising an infant, that sort of support is there. And that's the sort of federal funding I think that we could look at.
One is with inflation. We've seen the effects on Wall Street, the effects on Main Street. Everything costs more. There's a little bit of a difference between yourself and Mr. Laxalt with regards to how quickly lawmakers on Capitol Hill should act and how quickly the Fed should act. What do you believe is the best option for trying to deal with inflation and try and cut down the cost of life?
Yeah, so two things will help this, and there's not going to be a really quick turnaround here, but the quickest way to get to it is lower energy costs as fast as possible. We need to do everything we can to get back to American energy independence. The lower the energy cost, the better our economy will work and will help bring down prices. But federal spending is another tool. When Congress is spending, trillions of dollars at a time, just recently, $40 billion to Ukraine that they don't even necessarily know where that money is going to come from. Look, they did that in 9 days. They can't even pass, relief, emergency funding, post-hurricane or, after a wildfire in 9 days. So Congress has got to stop spending so much, and we also need the Fed to stop printing as much money. Did you know that about 80% of the U.S. dollars in circulation today were printed in the last 2 years?
We see the lower levels at Lake Mead. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's intake pipes that are now showing, and other things are showing as well. What, as a senator, would you do to try and improve the situation on the Colorado with regards to water resources, working not just in Nevada but with other states nearby to try and make sure we don't run dry?
Yeah. California has got to manage its resources better. They recently had a 15 or 20 year long process of permitting for a new desalination plant, which is supposed to help provide some relief for us off the Colorado. They got, basically to the finish line to say, oh, we're not going to do that. Look, California has water access that we do not have. And so if they're not going to better manage their resources, then it may be the case the federal government needs to step in and force California to do that so that we can have a larger allocation, because this 100-year-old agreement of where the water allocation goes is outdated and doesn't reflect the current population.
There's a couple of weeks left in the Republican primary season. What do you plan to do to try and bridge that gap?
Yeah, so I'm behind in about 3-week-old data now. We actually believe it from our internal polling that this is a dead heat race. It's going to be a sprint through the finish line. We've closed a gap of about 6 weeks ago. We were down 37. A little over a month ago, we were down 22. 3 weeks ago, we were down 15. There's a trend that we're closing the gap. Our internal polling is showing that. We're going to continue to make phone calls, have volunteers in the field. I'm all over the state, and we've got momentum, and we're going to win.
Should point out we did invite Adam Laxalt, the chief opponent for Mr. Brown, on this week as well. He canceled his scheduled interview. You can watch discussions with both candidates we have had before on 8newsnow.com. The winner of that Republican primary faces incumbent Senator Catherine Cortez Masto in the general election. This week, she held an Asian American Pacific Islander event. This is video that was provided by her campaign. The senator touted her small business loans, working on that during the pandemic, and setting up a federal hate crime reporting system. Our primary is underway. As you know, early voting has started. Here's a look at the latest civics poll. It has President Joe Biden pretty far underwater here in Nevada. Overall, he has a 34% approval rating. 55% disapprove of his work. Among independents, it's even worse in Nevada. Just 22% approve of the president's performance. Republicans have been steadily eating up some of the Democrats' voter registration advantage here in Nevada. Democrats had a more than 97,000 voter advantage back in 2016. In 2020, it was about 87,000. Today, it is just under 59,000. Nonpartisans have also increased by 95,000 since 2020. After a school year dotted with violent incidents on campus, Clark County School District is trying to make schools safer. And this week it unveiled a pilot emergency alert system. It's from a company called Centegix. Each staff member would wear a lanyard with a card and a button on that card. Staff can click on the button to initiate a staff alert. For example, if there's a fight in a classroom. Right now, this is going to be tested at 9 schools when school gets back in session, but it can also initiate a campus-wide emergency lockdown if an intruder enters the building at any time. Superintendent Dr. Jesus Jar would not say how much this system would cost.
It's reallocating of dollars. This is a priority. Our children and our staff need to be safe. We are prioritizing our existing dollars to make sure that our staff is safe.
Another pilot program is being introduced at El Dorado High School. That is audio-based. Of course, El Dorado is where a teacher was assaulted near the end of the school year. School safety is a nationwide issue after last week's shooting at an elementary school in Texas. Next on Politics Now, we'll talk about the deals Democrats and Republicans are trying to reach on Capitol Hill. Plus, we talk with the coach who is challenging CCSD trustee Danielle Ford's seat on the school board.
Pacific Southwest Emmy Awards. Welcome back to Politics Now.
Nevada is pulling its investments in companies that make or sell assault-style weapons. This week, State Treasurer Zach Conine announced the move in reaction to the recent mass shootings we've seen across the country. So this pullback amounts to $89 million. Nevada's total investment portfolio is about $49 billion. Conine says his office will make sure the investments won't be sold for a loss or cost the state any money. Conine is right now up for re-election. One of his Republican opponents is Las Vegas City Councilwoman Michelle Fiore. She is, as you can see, a strong supporter of First Amendment rights. The other Republican running is Manny Kess. Either one would be able to overturn the internal policy that Mr. Conine referenced if they are elected to that position. In a primetime speech on Thursday night, President Joe Biden renewed his call for new gun control measures. Among the policies he wants, universal background checks, bans on high-capacity magazines, renewing the 1994 assault weapons ban, and ending the immunity that protects gun makers from liability. The president also made an emotional plea after several recent mass shootings.
How much more carnage are we willing to accept? How many more innocent American lives must be taken before we say enough? Enough.
Joining us to talk about the continuing negotiations between Republicans and Democrats, Alex Limon from our Washington, D.C. bureau. Alex, this week the House Judiciary Committee took up and debated a package on gun measures. What is the likely outcome of that legislation?
That's right. Democrats are actually trying to be pretty ambitious in the House. That package is a really wide sweeping package of gun reform bills that includes at least 8 different bills so far. And they include measures like raising the minimum age to buy a semi-automatic rifle from 18 years old to 21 years old. Also a measure in there that would ban high-capacity magazine clips. And those are two of the bills that Democrats are choosing to highlight because they say they play such a big role, high-capacity magazines and semi-automatic weapons, rifles, in mass shootings.
That's what's happening in the House. Let's talk about what's happening in the Senate. Negotiations in that evenly split body, they're still continuing. What's the latest in the Senate?
So we actually have heard from some of the senators involved in those negotiations. Senator Chris Murphy and Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut. As you know, they're the two senators that represent the state where the Sandy Hook shooting happened. And so they have been very key and central to these negotiations. And they actually say that they are encouraged a bit by the way these negotiations are happening. They said that there are more Republicans involved in these talks than ever before. They say the talks are happening vigorously on a daily basis. Even though the senators are back home in their home states, they are talking, whether it be by phone or discussing things virtually. So they are encouraged by the fact that these talks are even happening because, you know, time and time again, we've seen very quickly after tragedies and mass shootings, negotiations just fall apart and things go nowhere. And so these senators say they hope that this time will be different, that they can find some common ground. But we've also heard from Republicans, although I will say neither party is giving us a lot of details about what specific measures they're discussing or any other specifics of that nature. But they both say they are talking.
And that was Alex Limon from Washington, D.C. Nevada requires background checks on private party sales, and we already have a red flag law that allows a court to confiscate a weapon. The race for the Clark County School Board. Next on Politics Now, Jay Calhoun joins us. He is running for the school board. Why he would vote to fire the superintendent if he's elected, and why he's in favor of prayer in schools. Plus, Interior Secretary Deb Haaland quarantined in Las Vegas, her visit to the Valley, and her COVID diagnosis.
This is how we show our community.
You're watching Politics Now.
Some students who were victims of for-profit colleges are having their student loans forgiven, and that includes those who went to Everest College in Henderson. It closed after findings of fraud were uncovered. The Biden administration is also eyeing a more widespread student loan relief package for Americans who are facing mountains of debt. The White House is reportedly working on a plan to cancel $10,000 in student loans per borrower. We're continuing our coverage of the race for the Clark County School District Board. Danielle Ford is up for re-election for her District F seat. A lot of people are running for that seat as well. One of her many challengers is Jay Calhoun. He works for CCSD in tech support, and he also coaches sports. I spoke with him about his goals for the district. Talk about your background for those who don't know with Clark County School District and why you've taken the leap into running for the school board.
Awesome. So I worked in Clark County School District, actually starting as a bus driver. So I was a bus driver with Clark County School District because I wanted to help with coaching at Desert Oasis, and I was suggested to get into CCSD, become a bus driver, because there was a deficit of bus drivers, so I made sure to come over. Then I coached with Desert Oasis, going on 3 seasons, about an end season and then 2 full seasons. And then going after that, I moved over to Rancho High School, and I was the site-based tech. I've been in IT for going over about 12 years, and I became the head soccer coach there at Rancho High School. So it was, I love being involved with the kids, especially because I have 3 kids and they're all in CCSD. So I wanted to make sure that I could be present, I could be that active dad. And, you know, I feel like a lot of times people see the moms being active, but dads have voices too.
What will your experience potentially bring to the school board that isn't there right now?
Accountability. Focusing on one thing. One thing I've been saying this whole campaign, CCSD has ADHD. They do not focus on one problem. They go to so many issues, but then there's so many things that's in the background that's crumbling because they haven't focused on an issue and actually solved it. Speaking of security, speaking of teacher retention, speaking of actually giving raises so that employees don't leave, so that we can have schools that can actually stay open, so that in the fall we can actually know that there's accountability, there's staff, there's resources. And when it comes down to resources, every parent asked, I think for years, why, after all of the tax money that comes in, why is the teacher still short resourced and don't have the actual resource they need in classrooms? Why do parents have to come together and rally in? It's like having a GoFundMe for supplies that should be given to our children.
The woman whose seat you're trying to take voted and has been very outspoken about trying to get Dr. Jara out of his position. Would you vote to fire or terminate his contract if you're elected?
Absolutely. Because one thing I believe is performance. He has every teacher have a performance eval. He has every person under him as administrator. That's why all the administrators are in a rat race to get on top and make more salary because of this eval. They're testing based off schools. But no one actually evaluates the superintendent. No one actually checks him in that.
Well, don't they do that every year? There's an evaluation for the superintendent and all the administrators. It's in their school board meetings at least once a year.
And where has it been shown? If you've seen the performance of Jara, the main thing is he wants to bring in teachers. Last time he put the initiative to bring in all the teachers when we had a deficit from the Philippines. Now he's trying to bring in more teachers by raising the salary to $50,000. So where's the actual change?
How does your faith guide your candidacy and your desire to be on the school board, and maybe some of the changes you might like to see implemented across the district?
Well, my faith, obviously I'm a Christian, and I believe that I've been praying for the school district. I know a lot on my Twitter. I've been doing prayers when the shutdown was happening, when last day of school, when all these things were happening. And prayer needs to be back in school. I remember we had a moment of silence, and everybody could be able to do a prayer or whatever you wanted to do. But a time to be able to get a relief away from all of the hectic things in this world. This world's gone crazy since COVID, and everyone's trying to get back to the norm, but we have to kind of figure out what that is.
The idea of prayer in school is obviously somewhat controversial. There's, I think, a Supreme Court ruling that's expected soon on a case out of Washington State on that. You're suggesting that you would like to see prayer in public schools?
I would love to see prayer in public schools.
You can see more of our interview with Jay Calhoun with Danielle Ford, who currently has that seat. Irene Bustamante Adams is also running for the school board. That's all there at 8newsnow.com. Two Biden administration cabinet members were in Las Vegas this week. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg was at a groundbreaking for the I-15 and Tropicana big construction project there. That project would include replacing Tropicana with a new bridge over the freeway and upgrading the flyover as well, the exit there. It's about $50 million of the $305 million price tag is coming from a federal grant. Interior Secretary Deb Haaland was also in town this week, but her stay was a little longer than expected. She tested positive for coronavirus Wednesday and has had to isolate here. Tuesday, she was promoting clean energy policies with Senator Catherine Cortez Masto. More This week in What to Watch, we're keeping an eye on the last week of early voting for the primary. If trends keep up with past years, close to 2/3 of the votes in the primary could be early or by mail. Plus, the U.S. Supreme Court will release some decisions on Monday. They haven't said which ones yet, but in particular, we're waiting to see if the much anticipated ruling on the future of Roe v. Wade could come from the Supreme Court on Monday. We will certainly keep an eye on that. We thank you so much for watching us here on Politics Now. All the political news you need is at 8newsnow.com. We're back with you on Saturday. We thank you so much for joining us. Take care.